What's up? I'm Omani Najee, and welcome to the SEER site, a site for seers. Just sit back, relax, and let's see. Hello, and welcome back, my beloveds, to the SEER site. I am your host, Omani Najee, and today we are going to discuss feelings, and nothing more than feelings, or in a nutshell, the life of an empath. Now that we are done with what I consider the introduction to seeing with the first two episodes, it's time we really start to dissect who and what we are. And where to begin, then, as an empath. So, riddle me this. Do you cry easily while watching movies or commercials or reels, or when you're stimulated by something? Do you feel exhausted after being around large crowds of people? Can you feel the essence of a place when you enter into that place? Do you get tense around certain people, certain environments, or certain situations, although it seems nothing is amiss? You just feel that energy. If you experience things like these are symptoms that you could possibly be an empath. And so, what is an empath? Being an empath is what I consider emotional sight. And in a nutshell, an empath, and I'm not talking about empathy or having empathy for a person. That is a stark difference than being an empath. So what is an empath? An empath is the type of person who feels the emotions of others and absorbs those emotions as their own. Now, although many in empathic circles limit the definition of being an empath to absorbing people's emotions, on the flip side of that coin, and there is a flip side to most anything, an empath will also mirror those emotions. Now, the reason I am covering being an empath first and foremost is because, again, from my experience with my own site and the sites of many others that I've met, being an empath seems to be the prominent site or the soil where the other clear abilities and sights sprout from. Now, that is not to say every person that is a seer is an empath. In my experience, however, the majority of natural-born seers are first and foremost empaths. And we really need to solidify the definition of what it means to be an empathic person. Mainly because in this current society, people have determined that being an empath or being empathic is a weakness, is a weak trait. However, in reality, it takes a lot of courage to be empathic, particularly in a cold world. Now, being an empath is, again, the most prominent of sites, the gateway, the soil. Empathic people live in an ocean of emotions. Some are able to traverse those emotional waters while many others drown in it, simply because they are unaware of what they are experiencing. And it is for this purpose that I would like to lay the foundation of all the sites at the feet of the empath. You may even realize that you are empathic, but you shield yourself from the perception that society gives around empathic people. And we're going to nip that shit in the bud today, I hope. We will also explore the mirroring effects of being an empath. You know, it's one thing to feel someone's emotions and take them on as your own. And in many cases, the empath doesn't even realize that they are feeling someone else's emotions. At the same time, and sometimes in our ignorance, we mirror those same emotions. So for example, say someone comes up with you and they have very, very high vibrations, very joyful, very loving. As an empath, we're going to typically soak that up and return that same exact energy in kind because of that emotional connection. On the flip side of that, imagine being an empath and someone approaches you as a punk ass. In that same aspect, the empathic person who is unaware of what they are experiencing will return that energy in kind. And so if you're the type, and this is just an example, if you're the type of person that's an asshole and you approach an empathic person and they treat you like an asshole, don't bitch and moan and complain about it. They are simply mirroring the emotions you presented. Now, if you are one of those empathic people who has the ability to control every emotional aspect of your life, I commend you. I ain't there yet. You know, sometimes these emotions sweep over like a tidal wave, and sometimes we may find ourselves drowning in those waves before swimming to our surfaces. And this seems to be one of the most prominent issues with empaths and why many empathic people suffer. With that, how do we feel with clarity so that we know we are feeling our own emotions and we're not being overwhelmed by the emotions of others? And before I take it there, I need to reveal the anti-empath. In the empathic world, there are those who are considered emotional vampires, and they're everywhere. These are the types of energies, people, that will siphon off good vibrations. And the typical victim of these emotional vampires seems to be the empathic person. Now, I'm not saying this is everywhere with everyone. It's simply been my experience once I entered into the realm of realizing what an empath was. And so how do we feel with clarity? How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our own energies while honoring our own emotional intuition. Because remember, this is an intuition, a sight. And we have to build muscles in that sight to be able to ward off the things that we don't want to absorb. I sure hope this is making sense, and we're going to really dive into it, but I want to introduce what the empath is so that we have a foundation of understanding where and why we're going to certain areas with this gift. But also to reframe what it is to be an empath or an empathic person. In our society, we think it's weak. I hear a lot of, particularly in the arenas of toxic masculinity, we hear that being empathic is a weakness, that you got to be soft, that you have to be weak to be an empath. If that is your impression of what an empath is, unfortunately, you don't know shit. What I have found is that it takes courage and fortitude and a lot of toughness to be an empathic person, particularly an empathic male in a society where we're told that showing emotions as a man is weakness. Most people that know me would never consider me weak simply because I am an empath. And when I say I am an empath, I am a very deep level empath. And there are layers and there are levels. And saying that I am a deep level empath is not a flex. In fact, on more occasions than not, it sucks to be extremely empathic. It really does. However, at the same time, being an empath can be extremely powerful. And I think that's why a lot of cowards cower away from being an empath, because you have to be strong to be an empath, male or female, two-spirit or whatever. You have to be emotionally strong to endure being an empath, being empathic, particularly in a cold society. And though you may feel overwhelmed sometimes and feel that being empathic weakens you, it is a strength that you are capable of carrying, particularly once you know why you are the way you are and how you may use the possibilities of using this particular site. I will give you a prime example. When I was a deputy sheriff, I was probably in my second year as a deputy sheriff when, on a particular Sunday morning, working the old jail in downtown San Diego, I was responsible for taking particular tanks and modules of inmates up to our rec yard, which was on the 8th floor on the roof of this building that I worked in. On this particular day, I took modules 4D, E, and F. These modules consisted of those who were charged with high crimes. These included murderers, rapists, some were gang-related, many were gang-related, and so a lot of gang crimes. And remember, jail is where you kick it before you go to prison if you've been sentenced to prison. So on this Sunday morning, I took up these modules full of high-level individuals. I really don't like using the word inmate anymore, but for the purposes of this particular experience, I will defer to that. So I take these 48 men up to the roof where there's a weight room, basketball court, and everything. And along with me is an inmate that we call a trustee, who was also the barber and would cut the hair of these men, particularly being a Sunday and people having court, with the upcoming week and weekend visitations. He had a barber trustee to cut hair. So I take these men from the 4th floor to the 8th floor through a stairwell, and then I have to escort these 48 men through 3 secured doors to get to the rec yard. Now, while they are secured in the rec yard, behind the 2nd secured door is where the trustee cuts hair. And so for this process to work, I have to go from the station where the deputy sits, through a locked door, through a 2nd locked door where the trustee is, open the 3rd locked door, let one of them out to have his hair cut and secure that door, and then walk back through the other 2 secure doors, waiting for the next one. Or this was also the library, so this is where I would also check out books to whomever wanted. It's also where I would hear a lot of stories from this man. I know we hear a lot of stories, don't talk to the deputy, things like that. But this is where I heard so many stories from so many men, from so many lifestyles and scenarios. So with that said, we're coming to the end of their time where I have to escort them back. And there's one more man who wants a haircut. This is where the empath ability comes in. And at the time, I did not know what an empath was or what it was to be empathic or what I was experiencing when that gift kicked in. So right before I was going to get that last man to get his hair cut, now let me explain how my empathic ability resonates. It's like a pulse or a radar. If the pulse is slow, danger low. But of course, the higher that vibration or that pulse intensifies. So I'm about to get the last man to cut his hair, and that pulsing begins. And I don't know why, and it came on pretty quick. At the time, none of these men are showing any acts of aggression or anything that would lead me to believe anything was amiss physically. And while the pulsing was vibrating at a certain point, the closer I got to letting this man come out, it increased. This caused me to back off, go back into my station, and decide it's time to take these guys back. I can't tell you why I was feeling this at the time, but something just did not feel right. Now, I escorted all these men to the roof by myself, not an issue. We typically didn't have issues when escorting them. With it being a Sunday and there are no courts, we work with a skeleton crew. So with 2,200 inmates in the facility, there are 18 deputies. It is also sick call going on and weekend visitations. However, with this skeleton crew, I felt it necessary to call additional deputies to assist me in escorting these men back to their floors and modules. So I contacted control. Hey, can I get a couple deputies up here just to help me escort? Not a problem. So 3 other deputies come up to help me escort these guys. And one deputy asked me what's going on. And I tell him, bro, I have no idea. Just something doesn't feel right. And I remember he specifically said, man, you're just paranoid. Don't get me wrong, he is a cool deputy, but he was like, you're just paranoid. And I can understand why he felt that way in this situation, because this was out of the ordinary. Even while we are escorting these men, one of them asked me, hey, Dep, what's going on? Why all the deputies? And I said, oh, just security purposes. So I get all these men back to their modules with not an issue. Nothing ever happened, or so I thought. Now, this is approximately 1993. And at this time, we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers. And if you know, you know. So the next Sunday, I am at church on Sunday morning with my family. And in the middle of service, my pager goes off with a 911 report to duty. This has never happened in my first 1.5, 2 years of being a deputy, so it stood out. Plus, I'm in church. So I rush my family home, drop them off, run to the facility, get in uniform, go to the briefing room, and there are a bunch of deputies. They have called all deputies in. So what had happened was the deputy who was working the roof this day took the same group to the roof, same hardcore dude. However, at some point when he was trading out men to get their hair cut, he was taken hostage by 3 individuals. I need to explain these individuals to you for context. One individual was black, 2 were Asian. The black man had just been convicted of murder and sentenced. This black man, he was so big that when we handcuffed him, we had to use 2 pair of handcuffs behind his back. We also had to cut the sleeves of our largest shirt so that this man could be dressed like everyone else, because he was huge. The other 2 inmates were 2 Asian gang members from the same gang who had just been convicted during the week for their murders, their gang-related murders. Now, although these men had been convicted, they were simply awaiting the train to go to state prison, R.J. Donovan, which would not occur until Sunday night. Hence, these men decided to take this particular deputy hostage Sunday morning. So it came out during the investigation that basically while this deputy was switching out these men to get haircuts, the big black guy, this man came out and put a shank to his neck, while the 2 Asian gang members took that deputy's radio, his key set, and his deputy's alarm. We used to wear these clips on our bed that when we hit the button, it would sound an alarm, cover would come running. So once these men took these items from this deputy and they have the shank to his neck, they take him to a stairwell on the other side of the roof with the intent of walking down the stairwell to the bottom floor and getting out of that exit door. Apparently, outside of that exit door were other gang members who were associated with the Asian gang members. These men, apparently, were waiting in a red Toyota truck armed with Uzis. Those who were waiting outside were supposed to spray this deputy with this Uzi, collect the escapees, and then bounce over to Tijuana to a house that they had rented as their getaway house. This all came out after the investigation, apparently. However, by the time I get to the jail and we get briefed, they're asking all deputies to help secure the place, conduct interviews and things like that. And they've asked me to conduct an interview with the big brother, big dude. By this time, this guy is in a rubber room. Literally, it's a 4x4 room with a hole in the floor as a toilet. And the walls and the ceiling are made of rubber with a light in the top and a flap in the door. So when I open the door, this man is in the corner, cowering. You can see the fear on his face. I'm not sure what happened before I got there. And so I start questioning this man, what happened, what's going on? To which he tells me that the initial plan to escape was supposed to be the week before when I was the roof deputy. However, because I had called cover deputies up there to assist me, it foiled their plan. At the same time, this man told me, the Mexicans told us not to touch you. I will explain that particular dynamic in another episode. However, according to this suspect, I was initially supposed to be taken hostage. To tell you how it all ended, the deputy who was taken hostage was an Army vet. Because of his military experience, this man kept a cool head and got out of the situation. Basically, when these men got to the first floor, they were unable to escape because the key sets at the time did not have any keys on the set that were accessible to the outside. And so this deputy calmed the situation down, handled it peacefully, verbally disarmed all three of these guys, secured them, and then called the cavalry to help him with the situation. Now, I will tell you why I honor this deputy. I was from the hood. He handled that peacefully. I'm the type at the time that would have been, oh, hell no. I mean, I was only like 24, 25, joined the department when I was 22. So I was still young and dumb. This deputy had life experience. My immaturity would have got me all fucked up. Because as soon as that big dude came out, I was the fight or die type dude. And so I say all that to say this. If it were not for this gift or this ability to feel energies, to feel emotions, because it turns out I was feeling the tension of what was about to occur. That was what these pulses and vibrations were, feeling these men as they were escalating their attempt to escape. And so when I say being empathic is powerful, I can honestly say that shit saved my life. In fact, the deputy who commented the week before, who was also called in that day, pulled me to the side and said, "Hey man, I apologize. I had no idea." I'm like, bro, I didn't either. But because something felt off, and this empathic ability, or whatever it is, kicked in, along with spirit guides, and again, that will be another episode. This ability saved my life. So when I hear certain individuals, people, say that being empathic isn't real, prove me wrong. And let's do this. When it comes to proof, I ain't here to prove anything to you. I am simply sharing information with you. The proof is you. No matter what I do, the only proof you need is you. And if these things resonate with you, then you are more than likely empathic. And I tell anybody this, don't believe anything I say. However, intake what resonates. Dust what you must. I'm simply giving you information. I'm simply planting a seed. It's up to you whether you water or grow it. But know this, being empathic is not a weakness. If you're a man that is empathic, it is not a weakness. In fact, it is a flex because it is a muscle that many others don't have access to in this particular life. With that said, I am under the impression that everyone is empathic in some way, shape, or form. However, this takes a lot of courage to live it. You know, being empathic behind closed doors is one thing. Living it in the open is another. And I've gotten to the point that I don't give a rat's ass what anybody thinks. I don't mind crying. I don't mind showing emotion. I don't mind keeping it real. I've been with some of the most deadliest people, had knockdown dragouts with convicted murderers on other occasions. And so being empathic is not a scary thing for me. Don't let it be a scary thing for you simply because others fail to understand what being an empath is and what you are capable of. Because in all actuality, being an empath can feel like a beautiful curse. I always thought it was a curse before I knew what it was. And how I came into the knowledge of being an empath. When I first heard the word empath, I would say it was in the 1980s. And I was a comic book collector. And although Superman was my favorite DC superhero, they had a female hero named Raven, and she was an empath. And I remember thinking back in those teen years, wow, that shit sounds familiar. Later on, and this is after my career in 2010, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, tells me about a website called Empath Community. So I go and look into it. And at first glance, I thought, these people are fucking crazy. But the more I read, I realized, hell, they're experiencing the same shit that I do, just in different ways. And to this day, I still have many friends from that social site. This was before the popularity of Facebook. You know, back in the MySpace days where I met my wife. It was the people on this site that started to reveal the experiences that I had. Started putting labels to it and context to it and showing me ways that I could cleanse myself, protect myself, manipulate those energies, the empathic energies. So it's okay for you to love deeply. It's okay for you to feel everything. And many times, you're simply carrying the emotions of others. For instance, when I was about 8 years old, my brother's godmother passed away. Her name was Maddie. And although she was his godmother, she was an aunt to me and my brother. Her husband was in the same singing group, gospel singing group as my father. And so everybody was family. In fact, I didn't know these people were not blood related until I was about 11. And so I was very close to this woman, and she passed away. Her daughter was like the sister I never had. Well, this is my first funeral. We get there, we're sitting in the second row. My little brother's over to my right, and I couldn't explain it at the time, but there was this pressure that just kept pushing on my chest. And it was so heavy. And I was weeping just uncontrollably. At the same time, there were things dancing around that didn't look like other normal people. And at, 8 years old, 9 years old, I didn't understand what I was going through. I remember my brother at one point looked up to me and said, "Why are you crying? She wasn't even your godmother." And I couldn't explain it. The weeping wouldn't stop. At some point, my Aunt Maddie's daughter, my play sister, had this look of concern on her face, and she turned around from the front row and asked me, "Are you okay?" And I said no, and I just couldn't stop this emotional overload. You see, I had never felt the emotion of mourning, let alone the mourning emotions of all these other people. And I didn't understand this at the time. It was so bad, in fact, that I was unable to go to the gravesite after the funeral with my mom, my dad, and brother, and everyone else. My godmother and her friend took me away from the funeral early because I was so inconsolable. I just kept weeping and it wouldn't stop. And there were all these things dancing around, and it was so heavy. So, after spending time with my godmother, they took me to the cemetery at the end of that service so I could go home with my parents. At this point, I'd never been at a cemetery. So when I get there, it wells up again. The service is over, but there are so many other funerals going on at this time. And then there are all these spirits there. And so we leave, and that's that. But this is what happens, particularly for children, particularly empathic children, when they are taking on external emotions that, one, they can't see nor understand, or two, that a parent cannot see or understand. In my particular upbringing, my outlet for these built-up emotions were always tears. My dad, however, would question that. "Why are you crying, sissy?" Every time I cried, I was called a sissy. "Why are you crying? Quit being a sissy." And so this is one of the main reasons that I held this shit in and internalized it. Now, no qualms with my father. I love my father. We're very close. However, in the society that he was raised in, pre-civil rights and things like that, Army vet during the Vietnam era, and again, a society where showing emotion is a weakness. This was his way of, and he told me, toughening me up, which I appreciate. But again, as a young child, I held a lot of this shit in. The first thing every man does, every male does, when he comes out of a woman is cry. because crying shows strength, strengthens your lungs. And as a man who held in tears for years, I will tell you what crying has accomplished now that I'm not chicken shit enough not to cry. It cleanses from the inside. Plain simple. It's water. It cleanses from the inside. It strengthens from the inside because it's removing a lot of emotional toxins. And this is why crying is natural. And so is being empathic. But we've been shackled by the ignorance of our society, our patriarchal society, our ignorant colonial society. Artists are empathic. Musicians are empathic. Men are empathic. I remember when my wife asked me, not too long ago, what do you think it would be like if you only felt your emotions, or couldn't communicate with spirit, or couldn't feel the energies and the things that you feel? And when she first asked me, it kind of stunned me because I don't know life without that. And so I had to really think about that question. Would it be more peaceful? Would it be more freeing? Or would it be limiting? And to be honest, it's all the above. But because I've been born like this, I don't know another way. And so I cannot always tell you how to ground. I can give you suggestions on how to ground, but not how to feel, not how to control it, because sometimes I drown myself. If I'm watching TV and some emotional shit comes on, I well up and I'm gone. But I say that to say this. It's okay. I wasn't diminished by crying. I wasn't diminished by showing emotion. Still a man. And so I've come to the determination that only cowards criticize empathic people. I said what I said. We're not weak. We ain't punks. I mean, come on, I've been raised around Crips, Bloods, SAs, OGs, homeboys, and shit like that. None of them considered me weak. So being empathic has nothing to do with your ability or any variables of being strong. I said what I said. See, as an empath, you have the ability to pick up on other people's emotions. Now, sometimes you may get sick after being emotionally charged. Some people feel that sickness. Some people, it becomes a physical sickness. Again, different levels of being an empath. And I feel we've placed too much mysticism around being an empath. Being an empath is natural. It is. Every child, it seems to be empathic. And then we're raised through a cold society that limits or drowns it out. In fact, that's where an empath drowns. It seems, for me at least, in not being able to show emotion. And now if you know me, you know me. I'll show you love. I don't give a fuck. I actually love everybody. And that's okay. It is okay to love. It is okay to have empathy for people. It is okay to feel those emotions of other people. And why is that? Because as an empath, we try and ensure or help those people feel better. Because if they're feeling that way and we can feel it, we feel it is our obligation to help that person emotionally. We feel that it is our obligation to help that person feel better. However, to all you empaths out there who are of this mindset, I used to be of that same mindset. Know that it is not your responsibility to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. That may be hard to hear for some and harder to practice for others. And in all hypocrisy, it is something I naturally feel to do. But no, it is not our job to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, although we continue to try and carry that yoke for others. For many empaths, this is the challenge. Grounding, cleansing, feeling yourself, feeling your emotions. I can say that in my particular situation, this is why I am a semi-hermit. Just so that I can dance in my own emotional circle. You know, when I was working the jails and did not know what I was feeling or experiencing. And at the time, being Christian, I remember before even walking in the building, I would just touch the building and pray, oh God, yada. Because I didn't know what it was, that once I entered, boom, boom, these pulses of boom, boom, because you are feeling the energy of violence, of death, of murder, of rape. You're feeling the emotions of these type of people. And that shit is dark. And most empaths carry bright lights within them. And so there is a contest. There is a battle when you are in dark atmospheres, like a jail or like our society. Yes, our society is dark. And that is why it is hard for empaths to shine their lights. But shine it nonetheless. Shine it nonetheless. And screw what anybody else says. Because it's natural. Because it's powerful. And because it's healing. That constant swimming in emotions, it's exhausting. That's why you will find many introverted empaths keep to themselves, stay to themselves. Now, there are extroverted empaths. How they handle life, I have no idea. That ain't me. So joining that empath community and meeting other people who had much, much more experience in this field than I did then and do now, they showed me tools to help ground myself. Because if you're not grounding, you're drowning. At least that has been my experience. And so how do you ground? Before I tell you that, let me say this. Our society, and whether you're in spiritualism, mysticism, or any type of man-made bullshit, we tend to try and make things so mystical and so difficult. And I have found a lot of people do that so they can hold power and collect money. And so I'm going to show you tips to ground yourself, to cleanse yourself, that will cost you absolutely nothing but time and energy. Your time and your energy. And it's this simple. The elements. Fire, water, earth, air, sound like that Avatar kid. But this is how you ground. For instance, when I met my padrino, my santero, Frank, his name was Francisco Quiroga from Havana, Cuba. That reading that I told you about in the last episode, although he did a reading, he also told me to do what's called a limpia, which is a bath, an herbal bath. And that was just taking some basic herbs, putting them in bath water, and soaking it in a few minutes. So water doesn't have to be a bath, a shower. Elements. Take your shoes off and just stand on natural earth. Sit still and breathe. Meditate. It's that simple. And that's all it takes. Now, I'm not here to diminish anyone's business or the things they do. There are other natural things out there that can assist in what I call continual grounding. You may not always have the opportunity to take your feet off and stand on the ground, or to sit and meditate, particularly in the business world. In cases like these, I used to wear crystals, another natural element, and other types of earth type materials or elemental type materials. You know, saging. Saging is something that is just a practice now. Saging is as old as time in varying cultures. The only difference is the materials they use. But saging, there are ceremonies that can help you ground. You know, like a sweat lodge, prayer, fasting. And I'm not referring to any religious context, just these are techniques, easy, no cost or low cost when it comes to finding the right crystal and things like that, that can help you ground yourself. Because remember, if you ain't grounding, you may be drowning. And so these are things to help you ground, while at the same time, you're capable of thriving as an empath. My beloved, I would say stop running from your gifts and just be. Just be. Because again, this is empowering. You know, sometimes we have to learn to listen to our own selves. You know, all those years I was clouded in the obscurity of other energies. It's because I wasn't listening to my own self and feeling my own self. I was unaware. So all I'm trying to do is make you aware of this. But listen to yourself. And listen with discernment and not judgment. Me as an empath, and what I've heard from so many empaths, we are extremely self-critical and self-judgmental. And so that's why I say, listen to yourself with discernment and not judgment. Learn to ask yourself, is this mine? You know, if you're feeling a particular way and all of a sudden, boom, you're feeling something else, ask yourself, is it mine? When I lived in apartments and I was feeling, okay, I would get these spikes of emotion, where I'd start feeling angry or agitated. And I remember thinking, what the hell? And then moments later, you'd hear the man next door beating his wife or something. And so you're feeling energies that aren't always yours and aren't always present. It could be from the room over. Again, it all depends on how expansive your empathic ability is. And if you're a little bit empathic, I'll warn you, if you go within, you may run the risk of expanding those impulses and pulses. I only warn you because it means you may feel more. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying that may happen. Although I was greatly empathic then, going inside seems to have amplified that. And so make your journey with caution. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. But again, learn to ride those waves instead of drowning. And then just learn to release what's not yours. How do you do that? There's grounding, but sometimes a simple verbal, emotional affirmation, "This ain't mine," can do the trick. I release this feeling. Peace out. It's that simple. It's not as mystical. It's not complicated, but it is natural. So remember this. Being empathic is not a curse. It's simply a dynamic of your medicine. If all of humanity made up a body, some would say scientists would be the mind of that body, and architects would be the builders of that body, that overall body. The empathic person is the heart of that body, the source of compassion of that body. So you are more than what you may give yourself credit for. You're capable with just being an empath. I'm not even talking about all the other abilities. We're just talking about the power and the blessing of being an empath. Just being an empath is a capability that shines. So let your light shine. And screw what the weak ones say. You're stronger because you're empathic, because you are constantly lifting the weights of the emotions of the world on your shoulders. So it's not a weak trait. But again, remember, you're not here to carry the weight of the world. In our next episode, we will delve into mysticism. And I will caution you here. The first 2 episodes were like being on the sand of a beautiful beach. This episode on being an empath is putting your feet in the water. Now we're going to start going deep. And I must caution those that are afraid to go deeper. Tread lightly. My goal isn't particularly just to explain what mysticism is or what it is to be a mystic, but to make you a mystic and how to see the world through an overall lens, which can sometimes be a scary thing because it demands a lot of self-reflection. So thank you for joining me today, guys. And just remember, being an empath is strong. And until then, think deeply, see clearly, and journey well, my beloved. I love you.